October 22nd, 1983. It was an ordinary day at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. A correction officer named Merle Klutz was escorting an inmate, Thomas Silverstein, for a shower in shackles. Silverstein got Klutz to walk ahead of him, which gave him the advantage of stopping outside the cell of another inmate, who handed him a homemade prison knife and a key. After he unlocked himself, he proceeded to stab Officer Klutz multiple times till he passed away. A few hours after this incident, Clayton Fountain, another prison inmate, used the same technique to murder a correctional officer named Robert Hoffman. After this incident, the prison went into lockdown and later became the first ever Supermax Prison. In these prisons, you'll find no ordinary prisoners. There'll be cartel leaders like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, terrorists like the Oklahoma City Bombers or Richard Reed. This is The Villains, and you are watching a day in the life of a Supermax prison guard. An ordinary day starts with waking up the inmates with the loudest and most annoying bell at 7 a.m. sharp. Even an inmate in deep sleep mode will lose any bit of peace after the bell rings. The guards do a count by 7:05 a.m., which ends around 8 a.m., after which the inmates are given food in their cells. A small food tray is passed through a slot in their cell with no choice of seconds. In total, the inmates spend 23 hours a day inside their cell. That 1 hour is dedicated to yard time, which is when they can either make phone calls, work out, or shower. Inmates who choose to make phone calls are forced to do 15-minute calls only because of limited phones and the number of groups present. The guards have to make sure that the calls run short. After this hour, the guards must bring all the inmates back into their cells and conduct a recount, after which they're locked and left to be alone. For visits, the guards must ensure they are no contact visits that take place either through video conferencing or meetings separated by a glass partition. There are very few rehabilitative programs, but when it is offered, the guards are instructed to make sure the service is one-on-one and is conducted with bars separating the inmate from the service provider. According to the Supermax prison rules, each inmate is escorted by 2 officers to ensure nothing happens. While the job certainly has a bad effect on the guards' mental health, they get to bring home around $60,000 to $70,000 a year. To understand more about Supermax prisons, let's first realize that Supermax is a level of security, particularly level 5. There are minimum, medium, close, maximum, and supermaximum levels in total. One Supermax prison named Alcatraz of the Rockies is ADX Florence in Colorado, which is considered the most secure prison in the United States. They have a dedicated section where assaultive, violent, and gang-related inmates are kept under Supermax conditions of 23-hour confinement and abridged amenities. Minor nuisances in prison walls are dealt with by sentencing the prisoners to 24 hours in solitary confinement, which is pitch black and has little to no human contact. You can't even get out of solitary confinement on good behavior. Each prison cell is about 7 by 12 feet, completely soundproof and equipped with heavy doors and windows to see out of. According to the New York Times, each cell contains a bunk, desk, stool, and shelf made of concrete, and a steel sink and toilet. According to a former ADX warden named Robert Hood, the Supermax is life after death. It's long-term. In my opinion, it's far much worse than death. In such an escape-proof situation, you'd think that smuggling contraband or weapons would be next to impossible. Surprisingly, one inmate proved that wrong. In September of 2018, Sean Shields, who was serving at ADX in Florence for second-degree murder, was sentenced to serve 37 more months after the jury found him guilty of possessing 2 homemade weapons, or shanks. According to court records, Shields was housed in the J unit. One morning, Shields and another inmate were working out on the lower tier of the J unit when a confrontation broke out with another inmate. A correctional officer heard the inmate yelling, "Come here and I'll break your jaw." As the inmate started to flee, Shields walked to his cell where he knelt and appeared to retrieve an item. Soon, investigators called the inmates involved in the confrontation and passed them through a secure pass machine, which is a whole-body scanner. As you can predict, Shields' scans revealed an object within the lower abdominal area. In other words, his rectum. If you've seen any prison movies lately, you know that prison guards have an open-hand policy on violence towards prisoners. When it comes to these Supermax prisons, the guards are gods, monitoring every move, escorting every prisoner, and providing as much as they want to give. Research by Urban Institute in January of 2006 revealed an unnerving effect that the Supermax prison guards possess. The research involved site visits to 3 states, interviews with 60 correctional administrators, wardens, and officers, and a review of existing reports. But let's be reminded once again that the goal of the Supermax staff is to reduce murders, assaults, and riots, increase order and control of prisoners, and reduce gang violence. The unintended impact uncovered in the research was the absolute opposite. There was an increased number of disciplinary infractions committed by Supermax staff. This ultimately increased the chances of a riot, which many Supermax prisons have experienced in the past. At the same time, there's increased tension among the staff, since the prisoners' fueled agitation is let out by harming either the guards or suicide. This also creates an unpleasant work environment for those who stay by the rules and don't enforce unnecessary infractions. Take, for example, the North Branch Correctional Institution, or NBCI, in Maryland. In March of 2008, several inmates were injured in what was deemed excessive use of force. The 6 NBCI officers involved were fired and faced assault charges. Then, in 2013, an inmate stabbed a correctional officer several times in the head, neck, and upper torso, which were luckily non-life-threatening injuries. Just like this, several deaths and suicides of prison inmates were ruled out as homicide by strangulation. Just goes to show that, despite making Supermax prisons the strongest in security, the guards need supervision as well. Remember in the beginning when we talked about 2 correctional officers stabbed to death by inmates in 1983? They were the reason behind the concept of Supermax prisons, and the idea behind ADX Florence. Let's take some notable examples of the past that'll demonstrate the level of Supermax prisons. First up, we have the leader of Mexico's infamous Sinaloa cartel, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Throughout his journey, he's been ranked by Forbes as one of the most powerful people in the world between 2009 and 2013. The reason that he sits in ADX Florence today is not because of his history of producing, smuggling, and distributing drugs, but because of his escapes. Back in 1993, he was extradited and sentenced to 20 years in a federal maximum security prison in Mexico. Despite being a level 4, he managed to bribe the prison guards and escape in 2001. There was an $8.8 million reward from Mexico and the U.S. for information. That search ended in 2014 when he was arrested again, this time sentenced to a federal social readaptation center. But in July 2015, Guzman escaped through a tunnel that was constructed in the shower area, which led deep underground, after which he got on a motorcycle and escaped. This cat-and-mouse chase ended in 2016, and he was extradited to the United States 2 days after he was recaptured. They had no choice but to sentence him to 30 years without the possibility of parole to ADX Florence, the Supermax prison from which he hasn't escaped yet, and can't. How would your day look if you were a Supermax prison guard, and what would you do differently? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.